"My wife's family will live here now," my son said. Then his wife looked at me and whispered, "Get out, old woman." Have you ever felt like a stranger in the very place you built with your own hands? I stood in the hallway of my house while the woman my son married scrolled through her phone and called me old under her breath. I bought the land. I paid every tax. I patched every roof leak with my bare hands. But that night, they told me I no longer belonged. They said it like it was final, like I should quietly disappear and make space for people who never lifted a finger for this home. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I smiled. Because sometimes silence isn't a weakness. It's preparation. If you've ever been dismissed in the home you once held together, hit subscribe now. Let me take you back to where this started. A quiet ranch in Wyoming. A house my husband and I built with sweat and love. A house I thought would carry our name long after we were gone, until my son changed his tone, and his wife, her smile. What happened next was never part of my plan, but neither was surrender. Let's begin. The first time I laid eyes on that land, it was nothing but open sky and hard dirt. My husband and I were still young back then, still working 2 jobs each, still laughing in the kitchen like we hadn't seen how rough life could be. But we saw something in that land, something we could build, something we could leave behind. He called it our last adventure. I called it home. We didn't have much, just a rusted old truck, a stack of lumber we bought secondhand, and a few friends who owed us favors. Every nail we hammered, every board we set was ours. No contractors, no debt, just sweat and trust. And it wasn't just a house. It was our mark on the world. It was the place we held hands after a long day, the place we brought our baby boy home to, wrapped in a secondhand blanket, on a cold March morning. That boy, Graham. He took his first steps on our kitchen floor, lost his first tooth out by the chicken coop. I remember how he used to follow his father around the yard with that tiny red plastic hammer, trying to fix what wasn't broken, asking what every tool did, how fences stood up, how cement dried. He used to call the land magic. Years passed. My husband got sick. I'm really sick. The kind that creeps in quietly and eats you from the inside out. I buried him behind the barn, under the tree where he carved our initials back in '78. I remember kneeling in the dirt after the service, hands covered in soil, thinking I would never feel steady again. But I stayed. I stayed on the land. I stayed because someone had to. Graham moved away after college. Said the town was too small. Said life was too slow. I understood. I always told him to find his own road. He did. Got a job in the city, met a woman, married her before I ever had the chance to really know her. Shayla. That's her name. Pretty girl. Smart, slick smile, voice like velvet but with teeth underneath. She didn't grow up with dirt under her nails or holes in her shoes. She didn't grow up with hard winters and harder choices. I could tell she loved my son, in her own way. But I could also tell she didn't love what made him. He stopped visiting much after the wedding. A phone call here and there. Sometimes weeks of silence. But I didn't push. I figured life pulls people in different ways. I kept the porch light on. That's what mothers do. When he finally called and said they were moving back to town, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Hope. He said Shayla wanted a quieter life, a place to breathe. He said they were thinking of starting a family, and maybe the ranch would be a good place to raise a child. I told him they could stay with me for a while, just until they found something permanent. He laughed, said I still made the best pie in the 3 counties, said it'd be nice to wake up to the sound of roosters again. I spent the week before they arrived scrubbing every corner. I opened every window, washed every sheet, cooked all his favorites, I even replaced the front screen door that always creaked when you opened it too fast. I was ready, or so I thought. The moment Shayla stepped out of that SUV in her designer boots and sunglasses the size of my teacups, I felt the air change. She looked around the property like it was something she meant to remodel. Like she didn't see memories in the chipped paint or meaning in the uneven floorboards. Just flaws to be corrected. Graham came around the truck and hugged me real quick. One arm. No longer. He looked thinner, tired, or maybe just distant. I couldn't tell. Shayla walked right past me and into the house without a word. Her heels clicked on the wood like she owned every board. I told myself she was just overwhelmed. City folks always forget how quiet real quiet can be. That night, we had dinner together. Chicken pot pie, fresh from the oven, just like Graham liked. He barely touched it. Shayla picked out the carrots. She asked if I had Wi-Fi. I told her no. She blinked like I'd just confessed to murder. The days that followed were polite. On the surface, Shayla stayed on her phone. Graham spent hours outside, mostly walking, sometimes talking low into the wind. They didn't unpack much. They didn't ask me anything. But I cooked. I cleaned. I gave them space. Because that's what you do when you want something to work. You try. Then came the morning I found the dining table cleared off. Every photo, every trinket, every scrap of history I kept in that hutch was gone. I asked Graham about it. He said Shayla was thinking of redecorating, said the table needed a fresh look, said maybe it was time to let go of the old stuff. Old stuff. That's what he called his childhood. That's what he called his father's flag. The one folded in the glass box from the funeral. I didn't say anything that day. I just went to the barn and sat in the truck for over an hour with the keys in my hand and nowhere to go. I wish I could say that was the hardest part, but I hadn't heard the words yet. Not the ones that would turn everything I built into a battlefield. Not the ones that would leave me standing at the edge of my life with nothing but my breath to hold on to. Not yet. The morning started quiet. No birds. Just the low creak of the front steps and the sound of Shayla's coffee mug clicking on the counter. I walked in from the porch with a basket of eggs, still warm from the coop, and placed them gently beside the sink. She didn't look up, just kept tapping on her phone with one hand and stirring the coffee with the other. Graham wasn't in the kitchen. I hadn't seen him since dinner the night before. The seat he always used growing up, the one with the chipped armrest, sat empty. I placed a biscuit on a napkin and left it near his side anyway. Habit. I turned to say something, maybe ask if she wanted anything for breakfast. But she beat me to it. She said they'd been talking. Her voice was soft, slow, almost gentle, but every word came with that thin layer of control. The kind of tone people use when they've already made a decision but want you to feel like you still have a say. They were thinking of staying longer, she said, maybe even making the place their own. Said it might be good for Graham, for their future. I nodded once, unsure where she was heading. Then she looked straight at me and said the house needed updates. The layout was old. The fixtures were worn. The land could be used for more than just sitting around looking sentimental. She said it all like facts, like things she'd been waiting to say for weeks. I stood by the sink, my hand still damp from rinsing the eggs. The silence between us stretched, long and tight. I kept my eyes on the window, out toward the barn. She mentioned converting the barn into a guest house, turning the front field into a venue space for weddings or events. Said there was money in that. Said people loved rustic charm. I said nothing. Then she asked about the deed. Her voice dropped just slightly, just enough. She wondered aloud whether it was in my name or Graham's. I turned from the window and told her calmly that the deed had been in my name since 1982. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Said, "Oh, of course." then took her coffee and left the kitchen without another word. I stood there for a while. The eggs are still resting in the basket, the biscuit untouched. The quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like a held breath. That afternoon, Graham came in through the back door. He looked sunburned, hair messy, sleeves rolled up like he'd been doing real work. But I knew better. He'd just been walking the perimeter again, alone. He leaned on the counter and asked if I'd given any thought to what Shayla had brought up. His tone was casual, but there was a stiffness in his jaw he couldn't hide. I told him the house was fine the way it was, that it worked for his father and me for over 4 decades, that it had raised a child, weathered storms, buried a man, and still stood. He shifted in place, then said maybe it was time for the place to have a new chapter. That word stuck in my ear. Chapter. He made it sound like I was a prologue, like I was something you read through before the real story began. He walked out before I could answer. The next day, I woke up to find 2 men in polo shirts measuring the porch. Shayla was directing them with a tablet in her hand, pointing at the beams and making notes. She didn't introduce them, just said they were giving estimates. I asked what. She said patio upgrades. Graham wasn't there. Later, I opened the drawer in the hallway where I kept important papers. The folder with the land documents was untouched, but I noticed one of the envelopes had been moved, just slightly, like someone had pulled it out, then placed it back in a hurry. That evening, I made dinner. No one came to the table. Plates stayed warm in the oven for hours before I wrapped them in foil and left them in the fridge. I heard laughter upstairs. Shayla's voice, bright and sharp, echoing down the staircase. Graham's voice followed, lower, but not tired anymore. He sounded relaxed. I sat on the couch in the dark, the only light coming from the kitchen where the fridge motor hummed steady. I looked at the pictures still left on the shelf, the ones she hadn't cleared yet. Me and my husband on our 10th anniversary, standing in front of the barn with matching sunburns and iced tea in hand. Graham, age 6, holding a chicken like it was gold. I listened to the sound of my house being lived in by people who spoke to me less each day, people who looked right past me like I was a fixture that came with the property. The next morning, I found Shayla in the pantry, sorting through jars. She asked if I'd ever considered moving into town. Said it might be easier on me, less to clean, closer to doctors. She said it with concern in her voice, but her eyes gave her away. I asked if she meant easier for me or easier for them. She didn't answer. Instead, she told me her parents were thinking of visiting, then added that they might stay a while, then added that her brother had always wanted to live in the country. I stood still. She placed a hand gently on my arm, and with the same voice one might use to tell a child it was bedtime, she said it might be best if I started thinking about next steps. My chest felt tight. Not angry, not sad, just tight. That evening, I walked out to the tree behind the barn, the one where my husband's name was carved. I ran my fingers over the bark, rough and familiar. I thought of how hard we'd worked to keep the land debt-free, how we paid off every lien, every bill, every tax on time. I thought of every winter we cut our own firewood, every summer we fixed the fence ourselves. I thought of Graham's little red hammer. Then I turned and walked back toward the house. I didn't say anything that night, not when they laughed, not when they passed me in the hallway, not when the lights flicked off and the house settled into sleep. But inside me, something moved. Not rage, not grief, just something quiet and firm, like a root setting deeper into the earth. I was folding towels in the laundry room when I heard Shayla's voice drift through the open hallway. She was on the phone, walking slowly through the living room, her tone light and breezy. She said something about the house being a blank canvas, about potential, about upgrades, about hosting something in the fall. A soft laugh followed. the kind people use when they think no one's listening. Then she said it. She called me the old woman, not my mother-in-law, not Eleanor, just the old woman. She said it like I wasn't a person, just some faded thing that came with the furniture. Then she laughed again and said I probably wouldn't be around much longer anyway. I stood still, my hands resting on warm cotton. My breath is quiet, my eyes focused on nothing. Something cold moved in my chest. Not anger, not a shock, just cold. Later that afternoon, Graham found me out by the woodpile, splitting kindling like I'd done for years. He didn't ask if I needed help. He just stood there, rocking on his heels, eyes not quite meeting mine. He said they'd been thinking again. Said Shayla's parents were looking for a change of pace. Said the city was wearing them down. Said the house had more than enough room if I was willing to be flexible. He didn't look at me when he said it. He asked if I could take the small bedroom near the back, the one that used to be the pantry before we turned it into a guest room. Said it would be quieter there. Said it made sense. I laid the axe down and wiped my hands on my jeans. I asked where they expected to put Shayla's family. He said to the master, the room I'd shared with my husband for 41 years. He said it like it was nothing. No pause, no softening, just a statement. I didn't speak, not right away. I walked back toward the porch, the boards creaking beneath my boots, the sun dipping low behind the barn. I went inside, washed my hands, dried them with the towel I had folded just that morning. In the kitchen, I opened the fridge, took out a pitcher of water, and poured myself a glass. My hands were steady. My voice, when it came, surprised even me. I told him I would think about it. That was all I said. He nodded, relieved, like it had gone well. The next day, I found the closet in the master bedroom half emptied, my clothes shoved to one side, boxes lined up against the wall. Shayla's voice floated down the hall, cheerful and busy, like a woman planning a vacation, not a takeover. She had already moved in. She just hadn't told me yet. That evening, Graham asked if I wanted to go into town. Said they were meeting friends at the local steakhouse, offered to drop me at the diner if I felt like getting out. I told him I was fine right where I was. He shrugged, grabbed his keys, and left. I sat on the porch, watching the dust trail behind their car as it rolled down the gravel road. The light from the kitchen window glowed behind me, soft and familiar. It was the only part of the house that still felt like mine. The silence settled heavily after they left. I stood up, walked to the barn, and opened the drawer of the old tool chest, pulled out a small recorder. Nothing fancy, just something I'd kept around since the days I ran meetings at the library and needed to take notes. I checked the battery. Still good. I placed it on the counter, pressed the button, and left it there. Not out of spite, not out of fear, just preparation. The next morning, the words came. Shayla stood in the hallway, her voice sharp but low, like she thought she was being kind by keeping it quiet. She said it was time, said I'd had a good run, said she admired my strength. Then she said it. Get out, old woman, like I was a stain on the wallpaper. A leftover dish that had been left too long in the sink. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I turned. I walked to my bedroom, picked up the photo of my husband from the nightstand, slipped it into my bag, pulled my coat from the hook. No one followed me. No one asked me to stay. I opened the front door, stepped into the cold air, and closed it behind me. The gravel crunched beneath my feet as I walked to the edge of the property. Not fast, not slow, just forward. At the gate, I paused. I looked back once, then kept walking. I didn't go far, just to a friend's house a few miles down the road. Mary Jenkins. We've been playing dominoes every Thursday since our husbands died. She didn't ask questions, just gave me tea and silence. I spent that night in her guest room, listening to the wind rattle her shutters, thinking of all the years I'd kept that house standing, thinking of the boy who once asked me how fences stay up, thinking of the woman who now wanted me gone. The next morning, I went back, not to stay, just to get what was mine. I walked in through the back door. Neither of them was home. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind that doesn't feel empty, just wrong. I picked up the recorder from the counter, slipped it into my coat pocket. Then I looked around, and for the first time, I didn't see home. I saw a house. I walked out. But this time, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was walking toward something. The sky was overcast the next morning, gray but not heavy, the kind of weather that makes everything feel paused. I stood at Mary's kitchen window, watching the wind stir the fields behind her house. Her dog barked at something invisible, then settled back down by the heater like nothing mattered. I hadn't turned my phone on since I left. It sat face down on the small dresser beside the bed she'd made for me, still plugged into the wall. I kept waiting for a knock, a message, a word, anything, but there was nothing. Mary never asked for details. I just made sure I ate something and didn't sleep through the day. She knew what silence meant. Her own son hadn't spoken to her since he left for Arizona 12 years ago. She said she stopped checking the mailbox for birthday cards 5 years in. Sometimes quiet is louder than shouting. That afternoon, I walked back toward town. The air was colder now, wind slicing through the sleeves of my coat. I kept my hands in my pockets, one wrapped around the recorder. I hadn't replayed it yet. I didn't need to. The words were already burned into me. At the post office, I asked to update the forwarding address. The clerk nodded, didn't blink when I listed Mary's house. Folks in small towns don't need explanations. They just piece things together from the way your shoulders sit and how long you pause before saying your last name. I bought a roll of stamps. Habit. I hadn't written to anyone in years. By the time I got back to Mary's, the sun had dropped low behind the grain silos. She had soup on the stove. Lentil, like always. I ate quietly, not because I was sad, but because I didn't want to waste words on things that couldn't be changed. That night, I turned the phone back on. No missed calls, no messages, just a weather alert and a sale at the feed store. The house didn't miss me. The people inside it didn't either. I lay in bed that night, thinking about the day Graham broke his arm climbing the tree out back. How he cried and screamed until I carried him inside, one hand gripping my shoulder, the other limp at his side. He was 10. He had called for me first, not his father. He said I always made things better. I kept waiting for that voice to return, for that boy to call out again. He didn't. 3 days passed. Still nothing. On the 4th day, Mary asked if I planned to go back and pack the rest of my things. I said yes, but not yet. She nodded like she understood. She always did. I started waking up earlier, making the coffee before Mary even came downstairs. I swept the porch, helped her sort the pantry, walking her dog. I kept my hands moving so my thoughts wouldn't settle too long in one place. But at night, I still stared at the ceiling, waiting for a word. A call, a knock, a note. None came. Instead, I heard from someone else. Marla Jennings from church called Mary's landline to ask if I was all right. Word had traveled. Not in the way gossip spreads, but the quieter kind. Concern masked as curiosity. I told her I was fine, that I just needed a little space. She offered to bring me a pie. I said maybe next week. When I hung up, I checked my phone again. Still nothing. That evening, I walked past the edge of Mary's land and stood by the fence where our properties nearly touched. From that hill, I could see the rooftop of my house. My old house. The chimney wasn't smoking. The porch light was off. But the driveway had tire marks. Someone had been coming and going. I stayed there until the wind picked up too sharp for my jacket. Then I turned back. That night, I replayed the recording. Just once. It was short. Just Shayla's voice. Calm, crisp, detached. "Get out, old woman." Then a long pause, and the click of her mug setting down on the counter. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the recorder. I just turned it off and slipped it back into the drawer. I sat there a while, listening to the quiet hum of Mary's fridge, the slow tick of the old clock in her hallway, the faint sound of wind slipping through the frame of the window. And I realized something. I had been waiting for Graham to say something. Anything. Not an apology. Not even regret. Just recognition. A simple word. One word. But none came. And maybe that was the answer. It was on the 6th morning that I woke up without reaching for my phone. There was no part of me left waiting. I moved through Mary's kitchen like it belonged to me, not out of comfort, but out of rhythm. The way long-married folks know where the coffee spoons live and how the light hits the floor just after 7. Mary was still asleep. Her dog followed me to the porch and curled under the rocking chair. I stepped outside and let the wind hit my face. It was colder now, the kind of cold that clings to your bones, not just your coat. I stared out toward the hills. My land sat just beyond the far row of trees. Still quiet. Still mine. At least on paper. That morning, I made a list. Not a dramatic one. No speeches. Just 3 short lines written on the back of a feed store receipt. 1. Secure documents. 2. Contact lawyer. 3. Don't look back. I folded it and placed it in my coat pocket, right beside the recorder. I knew I had to go back. Not to explain, not to argue, but to reclaim what I still had left. By mid-morning, I was standing outside the county clerk's office. It was the same building where my husband and I had signed the original deed. I remembered the way his hand had trembled just slightly when he passed me the pen. The woman at the desk was younger than I expected. She wore bright red glasses and smelled faintly of vanilla. I handed her my ID, then the folder I'd brought from Mary's, the one with the property title, tax records, and marriage certificate. She looked it over, flipped through a few pages, and gave a small nod. Everything checked out. Still in my name. Still legally mine. The way it had been for over 40 years. I asked her one quiet question, without raising my voice or my eyebrows. She confirmed it. If someone was living on that land without permission or written transfer, they had no claim to it, no right to change it, no right to move anyone in or out. I thanked her and stepped back out into the cold. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. I drove to the library next. The same one where I used to volunteer on Wednesdays, sorting returns and helping seniors with the copier. The librarian recognized me, waved softly, and pointed toward the back corner where the public computer sat. I logged in and looked up a number. Then I picked up the phone and called him. Took 3 rings before he answered. His voice was flat, tired, maybe even annoyed. I told him I needed access to the house, just a few hours, to collect what was mine and secure what belonged to me. He didn't protest, didn't offer to help, just said, "Sure, whatever you need," then hung up. I walked out of the library and sat in my car for a moment before turning the key. I expected something, a flicker of guilt, a pause, anything. But the silence on the other end had told me more than words ever could. I drove back to the house that afternoon. Not fast, not slow, just steady. The gravel under my tires sounded different now. Less familiar, like it was remembering someone who hadn't passed that way in a while. When I pulled up, Shayla's car was gone. Graham's truck was in the barn. The porch looked clean, too clean, the kind of clean that comes after something's been scrubbed too hard. I stepped inside without knocking. The air smelled like cinnamon candles and something synthetic, not the scent of wood and weathered books and lemon polish the way it used to. The kitchen had been rearranged. My old mixing bowls are gone. The blue dish I brought from my mother's kitchen was replaced with something glass and modern. I didn't stop to mourn it. I walked to the back room first, found my photo albums, my sewing box, the one my husband gave me before I ever needed reading glasses. I packed them carefully into the bags I brought, labeled everything with a strip of masking tape, just like I used to when Graham went off to camp. Then I walked down the hallway, entered the master bedroom. It wasn't mine anymore. The furniture had been shifted, the bedding was replaced. But in the corner, behind the dresser, I found the cedar box I had kept under the bed since 1985. It held our wedding license, letters from my sister, and 3 war medals that belonged to my father. I held it to my chest, breathed in, then walked back out into the hallway. That was when I heard footsteps. He stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, eyes wary, not angry, not embarrassed, just watching. I nodded at him, said nothing. He didn't speak either. That silence stretched again, the same silence that had followed me through every room in that house. But this time, I didn't wait for it to break. I finished packing the last box. I walked past him, out the door. He didn't follow, didn't call after me. And still, I didn't feel small, because silence is not defeat. Sometimes it's the loudest thing in the room. The day after I left the house for the last time, I sat at Mary's kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and the recorder between my hands. It was small, fit right in my palm like a pebble smoothed by years of river water. I didn't need to play it again. The words were etched into the quiet spaces between my ribs. But it wasn't about memory. It was about evidence. I had kept quiet because I believed things could still soften, that maybe time would undo the damage. But now I know better. People don't change unless something forces them to. And silence, no matter how noble, didn't move stone. I called a woman named Nancy. She used to work with my husband when he was still alive. Paralegal. Sharp, efficient, no nonsense. We'd crossed paths at enough local functions to know each other by name, but never deep. Still, I remembered she opened a small office on Main Street after her retirement. I told her I needed help. She said, "Come in at noon." I brought every document I had. Deeds, receipts, statements, property tax records going back to the early 80s. The print had faded on some, but the signatures were still legible. Nancy laid everything out on the desk in clean rows. Then I pulled the recorder from my coat. She asked if I had consent. I said it happened in my home, and no one had bothered to ask mine. She nodded once, pressed play, and let the short clip fill the room. "Get out, old woman," followed by a laugh, a pause, and silence. Nancy didn't blink. She just stopped the recording, leaned back in her chair, and said we had enough. She called a friend who did property law, a woman out of Cheyenne who specialized in senior rights and unlawful occupancy. They scheduled a consultation for the next afternoon. I listened, took notes, drank water when offered. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. Because this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about clarity. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because I was hopeful, but because I finally had a path. I didn't need to win anything. I just needed to prove what was already true. In the morning, I went into town and printed the photos from my house, the ones that still had my handwriting on the back, dates and locations in black ink. I made a folder with everything Nancy might need, labeled every tab. It felt like stitching something back together. Not fabric, but fact. When I walked back to the car, I saw Graham across the street. He was leaning against the front of the feed store, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a cup of coffee. Our eyes met. He didn't wave. I didn't look away. There was no confrontation, no collapse, just that one long, held glance. Then he turned and stepped inside the store. I drove back to Mary's, opened her gate, let the dog out, sat on the porch with the sun barely warming my knees. The quiet didn't ache anymore. It felt earned. Nancy called later that day. She said the papers were being drawn up, that we'd issue a formal notice by the end of the week, that if anyone contested it, they'd have to do so in writing, with documentation neither Shayla nor Graham had any legal right to possess. I thanked her. She paused before hanging up and told me something soft, something almost whispered. Most people never gather their proof until it's too late, but I had. That evening, I made tea for both Mary and me. We sat side by side, not speaking much, just sipping, breathing, letting the hours fall the way they used to when we were young and didn't know how fast time moves. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough. And when she nodded, eyes steady on mine, I knew she understood. I didn't need a battle. I just needed the truth to have weight. And finally, it did. I didn't tell them I was coming. Nancy advised against it, said it was better to let the notice speak first, let the paperwork land before emotion had time to twist things. So I waited. 2 days passed before the courier delivered the formal letter to the front porch. I didn't go with him, just watched from the other end of the road, parked in Mary's car, engine off. He knocked once. No one answered. He placed the envelope just inside the screen door and walked back toward his van like it was any other delivery. A bill, a flyer, nothing special. But I knew better. Inside that envelope were 6 pages, typed, signed, with a clear heading at the top. Notice of revocation of informal occupancy and demand for vacate. The law had no poetry, but it had weight. And for once, that was enough. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no rush of satisfaction, just a quiet confirmation that I had done what needed doing. No shouting, no scene, just paper. Nancy said it would take 48 hours to take effect. After that, they had 7 days to leave the property or file a formal response. But she doubted they would. Shayla wasn't the kind to read legalese. Graham didn't know where to start, so I waited. And while I waited, I prepared. I spent the next few days at the small public records office downtown, requesting copies of every permit, every inspection, every modification we had ever filed on the house. I sat with a yellow pad and filled it with notes, floor plans, photos, dates. I wasn't just reclaiming a place. I was rebuilding a foundation. One morning, I passed the cafe near the old train depot. Through the window, I saw Shayla sitting with 3 women I recognized from town. They were laughing, loud, leaning in close. One of them placed her hand on Shayla's arm the way women do when they've chosen sides. Shayla wore a soft pink sweater, pearls, hair pulled back in a sleek knot. She looked settled, like someone who had taken root, like someone who believed the ground beneath her feet was hers by default. But roots don't hold when the soil is borrowed. That afternoon, I heard from a friend at the church committee. Said Shayla had volunteered to host this year's harvest luncheon at the house. Said she spoke about renovations, outdoor seating, fire pits and hay bales and music from her cousin's band. I listened. Then I thanked her and hung up. 2 days left. That evening, I sat with Mary on her porch. The wind carried the smell of dry corn and wood smoke. The sky glowed a soft orange before slipping into gray. She asked if I was nervous. I said no. I wasn't angry anymore either. Just focused. It wasn't about kicking them out. That would have been easy. It was about putting things back where they belonged. Not furniture or boxes or names on mailboxes, but dignity, respect. The next morning, I dressed in clean jeans and a pressed flannel, tied my boots, tucked my hair behind my ears, and took the long way around town. Stopped at the library, the feed store, the diner, not because I needed anything, but because I wanted people to see me, still standing, still solid, not gone, not invisible. That night, Graham called. The first time since everything began. I let it ring twice before I picked it up. His voice was quiet, not shaking, but not steady either. He said he got the papers, said they understood, said they'd be out by the end of the week. I didn't say much. I just thanked him and hung up. There was no need for a speech. The message had already landed. By Friday, Mary drove me by the house. The porch light was off again. The driveway had fewer tire marks. I saw boxes through the window, a mattress propped against the living room wall. I didn't go in. Not yet. Let them finish. Let the dust settle. Let the silence return. Because that's where I do my best thinking. And they still didn't know what was coming next. The envelope came early on a Monday. It arrived the same way most things do out here. No ceremony. Just a soft thump against the floor of Mary's porch as the mail carrier moved on to the next box down the road. But I knew it was the one. The seal from the county office gave it away. A cream folder, heavier than regular mail. I didn't open it right away. I sat with it, let the weight rest on my lap while the kettle boiled. The world outside was still and gray. Clouds hung low over the fields, and the only thing moving was the wind through the bare trees. When the tea was steeped and the dog curled up beside me, I finally slipped a finger beneath the flap and opened it. Inside was a stamped notice, final and enforceable. It said I had legal standing to reclaim possession of the home, that no party currently residing had produced any claim or contest, that the deadline had passed, that the court recognized my ownership, exclusive and undisputed. I folded the paper, pressed it flat with the side of my hand, and breathed. Not loud, not long, just deep enough to know it was real. The silence had spoken, but now the law has echoed it, and there would be no confusion left. By Wednesday, a sheriff's deputy would be sent to oversee the handoff, just in case things got tense. Nancy said it was unlikely, but standard procedure. I nodded. I understood. I didn't want conflict. I only wanted the keys. That night, I didn't sleep much, not from nerves, but from clarity. It's strange how calm can feel like adrenaline when you've lived too long inside the fog of being dismissed. The next morning, I gathered my things into the canvas bag I had used for years at the farmer's market. Inside it, I placed the court documents, a small notebook, a copy of the original deed, and a single key. The key to the side door, the one only I still had. Graham never used it. I wore my boots, not the new ones, but the ones that had weathered 30 winters, the ones that still had dirt from the backyard garden in their seams. Mary offered to come with me. I thanked her but said no. This was mine to walk. The deputy met me just before noon. He stood tall, polite, eyes neutral but alert. He asked if I was expecting resistance. I said I wasn't sure, but that silence had a way of disguising resentment. He followed me down the driveway. The tires of his cruiser crackled over the gravel. My heart didn't race, but my hands felt warm. My skin is alive. The porch looked different, cleaner, not in a good way, in a way that said it had been stripped of history. The front door opened before I reached it. Graham stood there, hair messy, shirt untucked, face unreadable. No Shayla, just him. The deputy stepped forward, handed him a copy of the court order, and said what needed to be said. Graham read it, slowly. No arguments, no questions. He nodded once, then stepped aside. I didn't look at him, not because I was angry, but because I didn't need anything from his face anymore. I walked inside. It felt cold, unlived in, despite the obvious signs of someone trying to belong. The furniture was new, decorations are unfamiliar, but under all of it, the house still remembered me. I could feel it in the creak of the floorboard near the stove, the faint scratch on the pantry door where I used to measure Graham's height each year. The deputy waited near the front. I moved through the rooms with quiet steps. Nothing said reclaim, like simply returning. In the bedroom, I opened the closet. Empty hangers, a forgotten scarf, the smell of something floral, fake and faint. I opened the bottom drawer of the dresser and found my old nightgown. Wrinkled but still folded the way I always folded things. Soft edges, no creases. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Not long, just long enough to feel grounded. Then I stood. I thanked the deputy. He said he'd file the completion report that afternoon. I asked if he'd mind locking the gate on his way out. He tipped his hat and said he would. Graham was still standing outside when I stepped back onto the porch. His hands were in his pockets. He didn't speak. I didn't either. I walked past him, down the steps and to the side of the house. The key still worked. I unlocked the door, stepped inside. This time, alone, and stayed. There were things to fix, curtains to change, windows to clean. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that I was no longer waiting to be seen. I had made myself visible, not by shouting, not by asking, but by proving. And now the house was mine again, not because I took it, but because I never let it be taken. 3 days after I returned home, the phone rang. Not the cell phone, the landline. The one mounted on the kitchen wall with the long cord that still curled from too many years of pacing conversations. I had almost forgotten it worked. It was Graham. His voice was low, careful. He asked if he could stop by, said he had something to say. I didn't give an answer right away. I let the silence stretch long enough to be heard. Then I told him what time the gate would be unlocked. When he pulled into the drive, I stayed seated at the kitchen table, the same one where I had shelled peas with his father, the same one where Graham once sat as a boy, swinging his legs beneath while I packed his lunch. Now, I sat alone. I didn't meet him at the door. I didn't rise to greet him. He let himself in and stood by the doorway, hat in his hand, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome or already forgiven. I watched him. He looked older than he had last week. Not tired, but exposed. The kind of wear that doesn't come from labor, but from truth, finding its way through the cracks. He started to speak, but the words came out scattered. He said something about Shayla, about how things got too fast, how he didn't mean to push. Maybe he should have asked more, waited longer, listened better. I didn't interrupt. I just looked at him, let him see how silence could hold more weight than words. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small tin, set it gently on the table. I recognized it. It was the tobacco tin his father had used to store old keys. Inside were the spare keys to the barn, the shed, the truck we no longer owned, but also one more, the original key to the front door. He slid it toward me. I didn't touch it. He said he came to return what was never his, and that he was sorry. Not for what happened, he said, but for forgetting who I was. That was the first honest thing I'd heard from him in months, and I knew it cost him. Still, I didn't offer comfort, not right away, because I had learned something in the past few weeks. Some wounds don't close with an apology. Some silences are not meant to be filled. He looked at me again, waiting for something. I told him I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't the woman he remembered. Not the one who covered for everyone. Not the one who always made space even when there was none. He asked if he could visit again, maybe help around the place, mow the field, Fix the back gate. I told him we'd see. That was all. He nodded. I looked down, then walked out, slow and quiet, like someone who understood the weight of leaving behind more than keys. When the door closed, I stayed seated. The tin still sat on the table, catching the light from the window. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. It wasn't about the key. It was about the line drawn in silence. That night, I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the last cup from dinner, when I saw the porch light flicker on. Motion sensor. I stepped onto the porch and looked out. No one there. Just the wind. And the wide quiet that had come to feel like home again. I sat in the rocker, wrapped in the old quilt I had pulled from storage, and watched the sky shift from dusk to indigo. Inside, the house was mine again. But more than that, I was mine again. Not the version of me who waited to be invited into her own story, but the one who had written the ending with her own hands. It had been quiet for days. Not the kind of quiet that felt empty, but the kind that let you hear yourself again. The kind that let the house breathe. The kind that reminded you it was never noise that made a place feel alive. It belonged. I filled the silence with little things, washing the curtains, re-oiling the wooden banister, rearranging the silverware drawer the way it used to be before someone decided to put spoons where the forks lived. I opened the attic and let air pass through boxes that hadn't been touched in years. I lit a candle in the hallway, one of the old cinnamon ones I found in a drawer behind some mismatched napkins. For the first time in a long time, I took my time. On the 5th day, I heard it. The knock. Not urgent. Just steady. Measured. But not from someone certain they'd be welcomed. I stayed where I was for a moment, let the echo settle in the room. Then I rose and walked toward the door. When I opened it, I found Shayla, hair pinned up neat, makeup perfect, a soft beige coat. She stood like someone rehearsing stillness. I didn't step aside. She cleared her throat once, then asked if she could come in for just a moment. Her voice was even, but there was something thin behind it, like she wasn't used to waiting. I told her she could speak from the porch. She hesitated, then nodded. She said they had moved into a rental across town, said it wasn't what they hoped for, but it would do for now. Said Graham was trying to get back on his feet and figure things out. I listened. Then she paused and looked around, like she expected someone to arrive behind her. She finally said what she came to say, that she never meant to make me feel unwanted, that it was all just a misunderstanding, stress, circumstance, transition. She said it with the ease of someone who has always known how to smooth a wrinkle without admitting the fabric was ever torn. Then she smiled. But I didn't. I told her this house had seen storms, real ones, the kind that peeled paint and cracked windows. But never once had it turned cold. Until her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list the things she had done. I didn't tell her about the whisper she thought I didn't hear, about the way she moved my picture frames to a drawer, about the night she called her sister from the porch and said I was nothing but a lingering problem. I didn't say any of that. I just looked at her. Then I said something simple, that she had every right to build a life, but not by gutting someone else's, and certainly not mine. She didn't speak after that, just nodded again, small, stiff. Then she stepped back and turned toward the car parked by the edge of the gravel. She didn't look back, and I didn't watch her go. I closed the door and stood in the hallway. My hand rested on the doorknob for a moment longer than it needed to, because that was the last knock, the final one. And for once, I didn't feel the urge to open wider, to explain, to mend. There was a time I would have followed her outside. I tried to ease the tension, offer coffee or a seat. That time had passed. I had spent too many years opening doors for people who came only to rearrange the furniture of my life and call it improvement. Now I was guarding the frame, not with locks, not with threats, but with quiet resolve. Later that evening, I walked through each room again, not out of worry, but out of the ceremony. I touched the edges of picture frames I had returned to the walls, ran my fingers along the mantel where I had placed the wooden duck Graham carved in 6th grade. I left it there not for nostalgia, but for history. Because the past doesn't need erasing to be survived. It only needs truth. And the truth was simple. She came late, too late, and found the woman she thought would be waiting no longer there. Not physically, but in spirit. That woman, the one who begged for space, who folded herself smaller with every passing day. She didn't live here anymore. Only I did. And I fit just fine. It rained that morning, not a storm, but a soft, persistent drizzle that left the world smelling of damp earth and clean air. I stood by the kitchen window with a cup of black tea, its warmth a solid comfort in my hands against the quiet gray light. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't expect anyone. The house was quiet, but it was no longer the hollow, waiting quiet of a held breath. It was a silence that echoed back what mattered most, a silence that was wholly mine. The new peace was punctuated, not by knocks on the door, but by the soft, authoritative thump of certified mail on the porch. The bank statements arrived first. They weren't the thin, flimsy envelopes of the past, easily overlooked. These were heavy, made of thick paper that felt serious, demanding a signature. Sitting at the same kitchen table that had witnessed a lifetime of apologies and betrayals, quiet breakfasts and stormy nights, I opened them. Graham's name was gone from the joint account. The withdrawal rights had been formally, irrevocably removed. The locks weren't just on the doors anymore. They were forged in the ink of the law, embedded in the paper trail. A person couldn't charm or manipulate their way past a court order. A few days later, the notary called to confirm the car title had been transferred back solely to my name. That beat-up station wagon, the one Shayla had once laughed at, calling it practically a donation, was mine again. I found it in the garage, covered in a thin layer of dust. The air smelled of old oil and cold concrete. I cleaned out the glove box that evening and found an old photo I'd forgotten was there. Graham at 12, holding a fishing pole nearly as tall as he was, standing beside his father. Both of them were sunburned, their smiles wide and crooked. I remembered that day, the sharp, clean smell of the lake, the way my husband's hand rested on our son's shoulder, the easy pride in his eyes. I didn't cry. I placed the photo in the drawer near the kitchen phone. I had finally learned the crucial difference between keeping memories and clinging to illusions. The final, bitterest reclamation came unexpectedly. I had gone to the hardware store for replacement bulbs when I overheard a man complaining about the rental rates on storage units. He mentioned the facility just off the highway, and then my old billing account number, a number I knew by heart. A cold stillness washed over me. It was under my name, but it was not my doing. Nancy, my sharp-witted paralegal, checked into it. The truth was as cold and sharp as I'd expected. Graham had been storing my life in a 10 by 10 metal box 30 minutes away. The leftover furniture, the boxes of dishes, the lamps from my mother, all the things that had slowly vanished from my house under the guise of redecorating and upgrading. All this time, they had been claiming they'd bought new, while using what had been quietly taken during the months I was being systematically edged out. The court's authority still stood. The contents were returned. Standing before the open metal door of that unit felt like looking at a ransacked tomb of my own life, seeing my mother's china set, The one with the delicate gold trim piled in a cardboard box marked "Kitchen Old" felt like a physical blow. But the anger was a fading echo. I hired a truck, and most of it I donated directly to the local women's shelter. I didn't need the matching china set. I was my own person now. Mismatched, perhaps, but honest and whole. But I kept the rocking chair. It was the one from the back patio, the one my husband had bought at a flea market and painstakingly refinished himself. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a silent witness to decades of sunsets, conversations, and quiet contentment. That night, I placed it back where it belonged, right outside the kitchen window, under the eaves. The wood felt solid and familiar under my hands. I sat, and the chair creaked in its old rhythm with the wind. It was the same spot where I once sat, tense and shrinking, while I overheard Shayla on the phone, telling her sister, "She's not leaving. It's like she thinks this house still belongs to her." Now, I rocked gently, listening to the same wind, only this time with no one inside plotting how to erase me. There was no grand celebration, no champagne, no big cinematic moment of triumph. Just this: peace. Because that's the thing no one tells you about victory. When it finally comes after a long, quiet war, it's not loud. It's not a headline or applause. It's quiet. It is the sound of your own breath filling a room no one else is claiming. It is the simple, profound knowledge that every item in your kitchen drawer is exactly where you put it. It is the solid, satisfying slam of a mailbox with your name printed clearly on it, without edits or additions. Weeks later, on a crisp Tuesday, I saw Shayla at the grocery store. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the wheels of my cart squeaked softly on the linoleum. She was standing near the deli counter, her back to me, arguing with the clerk over the price of sliced ham. Her posture was stiff, her voice sharp with an indignation that seemed too large for the situation. For a fleeting second, an old instinct flickered. The urge to turn my cart, to retreat down another aisle, to simply avoid. But I didn't. I kept walking. I didn't hide. I walked right past her, my head held high, my basket half full with bread, milk, and a small pot of yellow chrysanthemums. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no flicker of malice in me, just a vast, calm emptiness. She was a stranger, a part of a landscape I had now moved beyond. I realized then, with a clarity that felt like sunshine breaking through clouds, that when you have been forced to fight for and take back your own history, your own home, your own dignity, you don't need to make a point. You become the point. I left the store with 2 paper bags and a carton of milk. Nothing heavy, except the astonishing weightlessness of being free. But the truest victory, the one that settled everything into its final place, came on a Thursday evening. Nancy visited, bringing a warm cherry pie that filled my kitchen with the scent of cinnamon and baked fruit. We sat and talked of small things, the weather, the goings-on in town. She didn't pry, but she saw everything. She saw the photos back on the walls where they belonged. She saw the peace in my face. As she was leaving, she paused at the door and looked around my reclaimed home one last time. "You know, Eleanor," she said, her voice soft but clear, "in my line of work, I've seen people fight to reclaim a house. It's messy and it's hard." She turned to face me, her eyes steady. "You did more than that. You reclaimed your name." Her words stayed with me long after her car's taillights had disappeared down the road. They settled the final piece of the puzzle into place. I walked through the quiet rooms of my house, my home, and understood. This battle was never truly about winning a war of wills. It was about refusing to be erased. It was about not having my existence relegated to a footnote in someone else's story. In my bedroom, I thought of the letter from Graham that had arrived weeks ago, still sitting in a drawer. It wasn't an apology, but a rambling confession of his own weakness and shame. He didn't ask for forgiveness. I folded it away in my mind. His journey was his own now. My role as the fixer, the one who smoothed things over, was over. That woman, the one who begged for space, who folded herself smaller with every passing day, she didn't live here anymore. Only I did. And I learned, day by quiet day, how to take up space again, without apology. Subscribe if you believe that reclaiming your place doesn't make you selfish. It makes you whole.